Hey y'all, welcome back. Today we're checking out the mystery bass of While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
While My Guitar Gently Weeps is one of the most widely beloved Beatles songs. Written by George Harrison, it is perhaps most well known for being the only Beatles track to feature a guest guitarist, George's friend Eric Clapton, who stepped in to record an uncredited solo that ranks as one of the most riveting moments on the White Album. But that's not what this episode is about. Instead, we're going to explore a mystery that has perplexed Beatles fans and scholars alike for decades. First, I'm going to point out the mystery, then present evidence from various sources, and attempt to solve it.
Okay.
And, as a fair warning, once I point it out, you can't unhear this.
Fair warning, y'all, this might ruin the song for you. What a great song. The White Album is one of the best albums. You know, usually you think of Paul playing the bass, but I think during the White Album, they kind of shifted things around. There was a point where Ringo quit the band, so Paul played drums. Who's playing the bass? John or George, that's who.
The central mystery in While My Guitar Gently Weeps is about something that normally isn't a source of controversy in most Beatles songs. Who is playing bass? On the vast majority of Beatles songs, the answer to that question is
distorted.
Paul McCartney, in a role that dates back to their earliest days playing in clubs in Liverpool and Hamburg. But some fans believe that a rare exception occurred on this song and that the bass was in fact played by another Beatle.
You know, there was a bass player in the Beatles before Paul. His name was Stu Sutcliffe, but he quit the band. He quit the Beatles. Before that, Paul was playing piano usually, so they needed a bass player. John and George said, well, I'm not playing bass. So Paul's like, I guess I'll play bass.
That the bass was in fact played by another Beatle. And no, not Ringo. In order to get to the...
Hey, look at that photo.
Beatle.
Why not Ringo? Look at that. He knows how to hold it. He knows bass. It could be Ringo. Don't discount Ringo. It could be Ringo.
In order to get to the meat of this mystery, let's first step back to the origins of the song and trace the rather convoluted history of this very special composition. In early 1968, the Beatles were facing burnout, both from the highs of their epic Sgt. Pepper project and from the lows of the tragic death of their manager, Brian Epstein.
Right. So this is the beginning of 68. When did Brian Epstein die? August 1967. So just 5 or 6 months before, 3 months after Sgt. Pepper came out, Brian Epstein died. Instead of taking a break, which they totally should have done, they went right back into the studio and they made Magical Mystery Tour. I think the first song they recorded after Brian Epstein died was I'm the Walrus, which, you know, read those lyrics and look into that regarding death and loss and grief. It's almost like they were avoiding any kind of emotional release. Yeah, they were burnt out. This was the beginning of the end.
In a much-needed respite, the band and their partners traded the pressures of a studio in England for an ashram in India, inspired in large part by George Harrison's deepening interest in Indian culture and Eastern philosophy.
Okay.
Although each of the band members ultimately had very different feelings about the quality of the trip, the change of scenery did seem to spawn a fresh creative energy in its wake that the band harnessed in the form of song demos that would eventually take shape as the White Album. Among these demos was a beautiful new ballad by George Harrison.
While my guitar gently weeps.
On July 25th, 1968, George recorded a sparse acoustic version of the song at EMI Studios.
Okay. You know, they also, when they got back from India, they went to George's house and they recorded a bunch of acoustic demos. I think he had a 4-track tape machine and a couple of mics. And you can hear those on a recent released version of the White Album. I think it came out 2018, something like that. But it sounds great. Check it out.
A few weeks later, on August 16th, the full band convened to run through the song with George on guitar, Paul on bass, Ringo on drums, and John playing an organ. After running through 14 takes, They did a quick mix of the track
14.
and shelved it for a few more weeks while George went on vacation. The version we're familiar with today was started on September 5th, 1968. But in the few weeks since recording the August version, a number of major events had taken place that would influence this recording dramatically.
Okay. See where it says Escher demo? That's the demo they recorded at George's house. So that was in May 68. Okay. A year after Sgt. Pepper was released. Then they recorded a version in July of 68. 2 months later, that's the one they just mentioned with the four of them playing together. And then they recorded another version a month later. And then they recorded another version in September. Okay.
But in the few weeks since recording the August version, a number of major events had taken place that would influence this recording dramatically. Firstly, Ringo had announced to the group that he was taking an extended hiatus from the band out of what he called a moment of turmoil and feeling like an outsider among the three other Beatles.
Ringo.
Soon
Poor
realizing
guy.
the weight of Ringo's absence, the band dispatched an apologetic telegram, encouraging him to come back from his self-imposed exile in the Mediterranean and promising that things would be better.
Yo, he just needed a break. They've been releasing an album every 6 months since what year? 63? That's a lot of work. And touring? I mean, they stopped touring, but that's why they needed a break. They needed to take a year off and go to the Mediterranean. The White Album is full of songs that are more individual to each one of their own styles, and I feel like they needed to go off and make their own solo albums. They were all writing songs, even Ringo. Ringo wrote songs. They just needed a break from each other and go have some artistic outlet some other way, and then come back and make a Beatles thing. You know? They needed a break. Ringo understood that. Ringo understood self-help. He was ahead of his time.
And so he did a few days later, returning to EMI Studios, welcomed with flowers adorning his drum kit. With the quartet reunited once again, While My Guitar Gently Weeps would be the very first song that the restored Beatles would tackle. And the quality of the performances on the new September version seemed to reflect that renewed spirit. The second major development had to do with equipment. Up to this point, the Beatles had primarily worked with 4-track tape recorders, which, as the name suggests, only allowed for 4 independent channels of audio to be recorded onto a single tape.
Yo, that's not enough. I mean, it's enough. But at that time, the Beach Boys were already using an 8-track. Most studios had 8-track machines, but EMI was so uptight about equipment. Any equipment that was brought in, there was a policy that the engineers had to take it apart, learn the design, learn how it was made, and make sure it was up to their standards, and then put it back together, and then it could be used. To take apart an 8-track tape machine, I cannot imagine. This was so antiquated, so outdated, but high quality. That's the thing. It sounded great. So maybe there's something to it.
Only allowed for 4 independent channels of audio to be recorded onto a single tape. That meant that multiple instruments often had to be combined onto a single track in order to make room for more complex arrangements and additions that the Beatles were increasingly fond of using. This often required compromises.
A lot of times too, they would fill up the 4 tracks, and then they would mix those 4 tracks onto another 4-track tape. And when you do that, the resolution goes down, and it gets crunchier. It gets like more microphonic sounding. And then they would overdub more stuff on the 3 remaining tracks of that tape. Pain in the ass.
This often required compromises and a fair degree of studio engineering magic on the part of EMI engineers to pull off.
Yeah.
But the band had experimented with state-of-the-art 8-track recorders at other studios nearby.
See, other
And
studios
this
had
had
it.
piqued their interest in getting one set up at their home at EMI. While Ringo was gone, the band had stumbled upon a brand new 8-track recorder in a nearby room and requested that it be set up for their use immediately. At this point, when the Beatles asked for something, they got it.
Nice.
The band saw this technological leap as a creative boon, enticing them to add even more layers of instruments and sounds to their compositions. Equipped with this new setup, George had the tapes from the August sessions copied over to the new 8-track machine to continue work on it. But after a bit...
See, that resolution of copy, that's going to degrade it. I would recommend just re-recording it. What do they got here? While my guitar gently weeps. These are the takes? Okay, got it.
To their compositions. Equipped with this new setup, George had the tapes from the August sessions copied over to the new 8-track machine to continue work on it. But after a bit of late-night experimenting with ideas like a backwards guitar solo, George decided to abandon work on the prior version entirely and start from scratch. For this new version, he had brought a secret weapon. His close friend Eric Clapton, invited by George to the studio to contribute an extremely rare guest guitar part. With Eric Clapton on electric guitar, George on acoustic guitar, Ringo on drums, Paul on piano,
Ooh, that kick drum.
and John most likely on organ. The group worked their way through more than 20 takes, eventually settling on take 25 as the winner for the backing track.
Okay, so it's the 5 of them playing at first. See, I don't think they needed Eric Clapton. I think his guitar playing in that song is wonderful, but just imagine if it was George's slide playing. He wasn't really known for slide playing at that point. That's something he did in the 70s and 80s. He became known for the slide playing. But it would be so nice to hear him play slide on this song.
And John most likely on organ. The group worked their way through more than 20 takes, eventually settling on take 25 as the winner for the backing track.
But if you look at this, there were only 3 complete takes. A couple false starts, 20 was complete, 21, I don't know what this means. I don't know. Maybe that means also complete? Okay, so maybe there were 4 complete takes. Drums on track 1, guitar on track 2, piano and organ on track 3, acoustic and something on track 4, vocals on track 5, bass on track 6. I can't read it. Engineered by Ken Scott and Jay Smith. All right.
A fun little tidbit, during downtime in this session, Paul ran through a primitive version of a song that wouldn't be released for another year and a half.
Wow.
Incidentally, this same snippet also confirms that Eric Clapton was indeed there, despite receiving no credit on the final album sleeve.
Why didn't I get credit?
Cans on, Eric.
But back to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which...
Cans on, Eric. Cans are what they called headphones.
Cans on, Eric.
But back to While My Guitar Gently Weeps, which was finally taking shape. With everyone's hands already occupied with various instruments during the recording of the backing track, the bass part, normally played by Paul, who instead was on piano here, would have to be added later on. On the next day, September 6th, the band reconvened to finish the track by adding more vocals, additional percussion, and the bass part. So here's where we get to the mystery.
That doesn't sound like Paul. That sounds like John to me. And I don't think George would play chords like that. You know? That's a John thing. It's a John thing.
Let's first listen to the isolated bass track to hear if we can identify what's happening. During the verses of the song, it sounds like there's one bass guitar, alternating between single notes and power chords. What is clear is that this is a much heavier sound than on most Beatles songs.
Yeah.
And the band was clearly fond of it during this period, using...
Yo, so usually a bass plays one note, like that. But he's playing a guitar chord. That's a power chord. Very guitar playery, not a bass player thing, you know? That sounds like John.
And the band was clearly fond of it during this period, using it for a few other White Album tracks recorded in August and September 1968, such as Back in the USSR, Helter
Sounds
Skelter,
the same.
and Glass Onion. And frankly, it's awesome.
Yeah.
The default answer to
Sounds
the
like a
question
grunt.
of who is playing bass is, as
Also on Piggies, I think they use that sound. It sounds like a pig grunt.
The default answer to the question of who is playing bass is, as any Beatles fan knows, Paul. Not surprisingly, then, many Beatles websites credit Paul with the part here. But here's where things get weird. Giles Martin, son of legendary Beatles producer George Martin, made a rather stunning claim in a 2018 interview with NPR.
John was, he played the bass on While My Guitar Gently Weeps. For the final take here, there's a sort of chugging, there's a ding, 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 which is a six-string bit. Paul is playing piano and organ and singing.
This claim was echoed in the extensive liner notes included with the 2018 White Album Deluxe Edition.
That's what I'm talking about, the 2018 Deluxe Edition. I didn't read the liner notes, though. I just listened to it on iTunes. You see, I miss liner notes.
A breathtaking project that Giles oversaw. For some fans, this alleged revelation was a major shock. First off, could John even play a bass part?
Yeah.
Well, yes, but with an important caveat. If this were John playing, he likely wouldn't have been playing a typical 4-string bass guitar,
Right.
but instead something called a Fender 6, which is a hybrid instrument that looks like a standard 6-string guitar.
Y'all, yes, this plays exactly like a guitar. I played one at Guitar Center about 6 months ago, and I really wanted to get one. Well, it costs money. Bass players usually don't like them because if they're playing with their fingers, it's really tough to get their fingers between the strings. See, that's a bass, but he's playing it like a guitar. Beautiful. Anyway.
Called a Fender 6, which is a hybrid instrument that looks like a standard 6-string guitar, but is tuned to a lower octave to make it sound more in the range of a bass guitar.
Right.
That means that a guitar player like John or George could easily pick up this instrument and add a fairly convincing bass accompaniment to a song. The Beatles, in fact, owned a Fender 6, which incidentally made a public appearance right before this session
There it
in
is.
George's hands during the filming of the Hey Jude promotional video on September the 4th. There are also photos of John holding it around this period, so clearly both Beatle guitarists had some interest in it. So Giles' 2018 revelation about John could be true, but the mystery doesn't end there.
Yo, for a guitar player to pick up a bass, it's not that much of an adjustment, honestly. But it is a whole different feel. If you're a guitar player who's used to playing without looking down at their fingers, it's almost impossible to feel where the notes are on this. Anyway, I guess my point is that it's not that much of a difference. It's essentially the same instrument. It just feels a lot different in your hands.
During the bridge sections of the song, something else gets added in. At least one other instrument comes in to mimic the bass line. This gets a little buried in the final mix, but if we isolate it, it's a lot clearer.
It's another guitar.
Ken Scott, who was the young, aspiring studio engineer at EMI during those recording sessions for While My Guitar Gently Weeps, recalled in his 2012 memoir that the 4-string bass was sometimes doubled by a 6-string bass on some songs. By this time, Paul had acquired a Fender Jazz bass, which he used in lieu of his Rickenbacker. And a Fender Bass 6 was always around the studio. You hear it on Piggies, While My Guitar Gently Weeps, Glass Onion, and Rocky Raccoon. The two parts were always played together and never overdubbed individually. Scott suggested that the band, now equipped with the extra flexibility of the 8-track recorder, may have been inspired to copy a similar style from the music of Bert Kaempfert, a German composer and record producer who had befriended the band in the early 1960s and in fact played a major role in bringing the Beatles into the spotlight, signing their first official recording contract. You can hear a similar doubling of the bass line in some of his work.
So they're saying that they doubled it with another guitar, like a regular guitar?
Funnily enough, a few years later, John complained about this type of bass sound during the sessions for his Imagine solo album.
Bass sounds too trebly. It sounds like Bert Kaempfert again.
This style was also popular in early American country western records, where it was referred to as tic-tac style. Adopting this special style here fits with their overall approach during the White Album of incorporating references and nods to nearly all genres of music in some form or another. But back to the question at hand. Ken Scott's account seems to suggest that Paul had to have been playing here, and that someone else, John, George, or possibly both of them, joined during the bridge part to emulate the tic-tac sound. This bridge part is even referenced in the fantastic miniseries McCartney 3-2-1.
Very aggressive sound, isn't it? Doesn't even sound like a bass.
Unfortunately, the mystery of who is actually playing these parts is never addressed. It seems that near
Paul, give us a call. Put the word out. Let us know who did it. Right? Ringo. Who? Let us know.
Who is actually playing these parts is never addressed.
Look at Paul's face there. It's like he's keeping a secret.
Unfortunately, the mystery of who is actually playing these parts is never addressed.
Paul.
It seems that nearly every Beatles website, fan forum contributor, and Reddit commenter has a slightly different take on what actually happened during that session. So while we don't have a definitive answer from Paul himself, we do know based on Ken Scott's recollection that at least two Beatles were playing this part at some point, calling into question many of the unofficial accounts of this session. Perhaps Giles is right, and this was John taking the helm on the Fender 6 bass throughout, a role that he would allegedly take up again less than a week later during the sessions for Helter Skelter.
Yo, it sounds like him. Like even the picking, the way he's holding the pick is going to affect the sound. It just sounds like him. It sounds like John.
During the sessions for Helter Skelter.
See?
A topic that I'll save for another episode. But short of definitive proof, this mystery may be left up to you to decide. What do you think is the most accurate lineup here? Let me know in the comments.
It's John.
All mysteries aside, While My Guitar Gently Weeps is a hauntingly beautiful ballad with layers of diverse yet complementary musical ideas that transport you to another place entirely during its 5-minute journey. The song, for good reason, is more than just a beloved fan favorite. It's also one of the most highly appreciated Beatles songs by other musicians, inspiring countless live performances, including one of the most memorable live solos of all time, performed by Prince in 2004
That's
at the Rock
crazy.
and Roll Hall of Fame induction ceremony. Aside from the technical milestone of it being the first Beatles song to take advantage of EMI's 8-track recorder, and aside
didn't
from
know that.
featuring the first and only guest guitarist on any Beatles recording, While My Guitar Gently Weeps represents something even more significant in the Beatles' story. The moment when George Harrison established himself as a songwriter on par with the Lennon-McCartney machine, paving the way for subsequent Beatles masterpieces like Here Comes the Sun and Something, and also previewing the pent-up talent that would come pouring out a few years later across George's solo epic All Things Must Pass. And although we lost George far too soon, he left an indelible impact through songs like these on his fellow Beatles, on the music world, and on us, the fans. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and please share and subscribe to my channel if you haven't already.
Yeah, dude. Yeah.
As always, thanks for watching.
Yo, be sure to go to You Can't Unhear This and like and subscribe. It was John. It was John. Even Giles Martin says it was John. I think it was John. I'm sure it was John. Why doesn't Paul admit that it's John? Why doesn't Paul make a public statement? Maybe Paul wants credit. It is a badass bass part. It's John. Great songwriting, George. I wish you played slide on it. Be sure to go to You Can't Unhear This and like and subscribe. And if you made it this far in the video, why not give me a like and subscribe and help me out, you know? I'd like to thank my patrons. I'd like to thank my Buy Me a Coffee people. Thank y'all for watching this with me. And I'll see you next time. Later.